I never expected the person who shared my last name to be the one aiming to bury my career alive, but the boardroom door had barely closed before I heard it. "He's only here because of blood, not brains." The voice was smooth, confident, venom hidden in velvet. My cousin, Evan, heir to our family's manufacturing company and golden child of every room he stepped into. I'd always thought we were close, childhood sleepovers, secret handshakes, promises of ruling the company together one day. But those things fade fast when one of you tastes power, and the other becomes an obstacle. My name is Mason Hale, 28 years old, the first in the family to earn an MBA on merit, scholarship, and sleepless nights. Meanwhile, Evan waltzed into the executive wing straight out of college, title gift-wrapped by his father, my uncle. Nepotism wasn't a rumor in our company. It was a tradition. Yet despite his head start, I was the one quietly rising. My proposals saved the company thousands. My partnerships brought in new clients. Employees came to me for solutions. And Evan hated that. He played the charming prince at family dinners, but behind office doors he was different, calculating, territorial, always watching me like I'd stolen something from him. I ignored the first few jabs, the lucky break jokes, the smirks when I stayed late. But then came the board meeting, and he struck publicly. He claimed my latest contract proposal was plagiarized. Said my numbers didn't check out. That I was cutting corners for applause. I sat there frozen, watching the directors whisper, eyes narrowing toward me, and Evan just leaned back like he'd tossed a match and wanted to watch the building burn. The worst part. No one questioned him. Why would they? He was the Hale they trusted. The future CEO. Later that week, he smiled as he passed my desk, like he wanted me to see the knife he'd shoved in my back. I tried shaking it off. Maybe it was stress. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe Evan was just rough, competitive, pushing me. We were family, after all, right? But then I found something odd: emails, meeting schedules, conversations happening without me. My login mysteriously changed. A major client meeting I prepared was suddenly reassigned to him. And as I stood outside the office that night, lights glowing through the glass, one thought settled heavy in my chest. Evan wasn't trying to compete with me. He was trying to erase me. And I had no idea just how far he'd go, or how badly it would backfire. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that families fought, that competition made us better, but the cracks were spreading faster than I could plaster over them. The week after Evan hijacked my client meeting, I arrived early to prepare quarterly reports. My office door, normally locked, hung slightly open. Papers scattered across my desk like someone had rummaged through them in a hurry. My laptop was still warm, even though I'd shut it down the night before. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the glowing screen as if it might explain itself. Instead, what greeted me was worse. Open on my desktop was the contract proposal I'd drafted, the same one Evan had accused me of plagiarizing, but the figures were altered. Numbers inflated. Clauses missing. It looked sloppy, unprofessional, like evidence. Someone had tried to make it look like I'd tampered with it. I backed away slowly. My hands shook as I locked the file, changed passwords, even set up fingerprint verification. But the unease didn't leave, it grew teeth. In meetings, Evan started cutting me off mid-sentence, smiling like he was doing me a favor. The directors laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. Decisions I'd worked weeks on were suddenly pending review, while Evan's were fast-tracked overnight. He got a corner office with glass walls and pristine furniture. My request for an extra intern to handle the workload was denied without explanation. I tried talking to HR, a disaster. The representative nodded politely, but her eyes flicked to the framed picture of Evan's father hanging over her shoulder. She said she would look into it, in the same voice you use when promising to start a diet tomorrow. That night, I drove home with the radio off, replaying everything in my mind. The whispers in hallways. The locked doors that opened late. The late-night meetings I wasn't invited to. Even the janitor, who usually greeted me with a tired smile, avoided eye contact. It felt like the whole building was shifting, like something under the surface was moving and I was the only one who heard the cracks forming. Still, part of me clung to reason. Maybe Evan wasn't behind it. Maybe someone else was stirring the pot, hoping to watch us collide. He was arrogant, sure, privileged beyond belief. But was he capable of orchestrating this? The next day, I got my answer, or at least another red flag disguised as a coincidence. I found Evan in his office talking on the phone, voice low but tense. He didn't notice I was standing by the half-closed door. He has no idea, he said, laughing softly. A pause. Trust me, he'll fold soon. The words hit like a punch to the ribs. He might not have said my name. He didn't need to. Because deep down, I knew he was talking about me. The phone call replayed in my mind for days, like a song I couldn't unhear. He has no idea. Those 4 words gnawed at me, a quiet, steady chew at the edges of my sanity. I needed proof. Not paranoia, not assumptions, evidence. So I stayed late one night, long after everyone else left. The office was silent except for the hum of ventilation and the rhythmic tapping of my heartbeat in my ears. Evan's office lights were still on, but he was nowhere in sight. I took the chance. Hands trembling, I slipped inside. His desk was immaculate, almost staged. But the unlocked file drawer told a different story. Inside were copies of my proposals, marked up in red pen, rewritten under Evan's name. Entire months of work, stolen. Every client, every contract, every late-night spreadsheet, rebranded as his. There was even a printed timeline labeled Transition Strategy, Phase Out Mason Hale. My name, my life, reduced to bullet points. But the final page was the kill shot. A confidential memo drafted to the board. Mason has demonstrated repeated misconduct, falsifying documents to claim credit for contracts he did not secure. I recommend termination effective next quarter to preserve the company's integrity. Evan Hale. Termination. Fabricated misconduct. My future, evaporating in ink. I sank into his leather chair, the weight of betrayal slamming into me. My cousin wasn't just undermining me. He was engineering my ruin. Handpicking evidence. Rewriting history. Preparing to remove me like rot from the family tree. For a long moment, I just stared at the papers through a blur of hot, burning tears. Anger swelled under my skin, sharp and electric. My throat tasted of metal and humiliation. I wanted to rip the documents apart, storm his office, scream until the walls shook. But I froze instead, paralyzed by the realization that no one would believe me over him. He was the prodigy, the golden Hale. I was the hard worker, yes, but expendable. Quiet. Overshadowed. Easy to erase. And that's when the real heartbreak hit. He hadn't just taken my work. He was taking my place. My role in the company. My future. My legacy, the one I'd built from sweat, not privilege. I stuffed the documents into my briefcase, hands steady now, fueled by something darker than fear. If Evan thought I'd fold, he didn't know me at all. I walked out of the office that night like a ghost, silent, invisible, but burning with something new. Not just betrayal. Not just rage. A promise. He wanted war. He was going to get it. And I would make sure his nepotism, the weapon he thought would crush me, would be the very thing that destroyed him instead. You said. For 2 days after discovering Evan's plan, I barely slept. I went to work. I smiled. I pretended. But inside, something was dying, or maybe shedding its skin. Every time I looked at Evan across a conference table, heard him praised for my work, or watched him flash that easy grin at the board, the pain twisted deeper. It wasn't just professional loss I was staring down. It was erasure. He wasn't content to win. He wanted me gone, forgotten, rewritten as a failure while he stepped over my corpse on his way to the CEO chair. And yet, beneath the grief, something else was flickering. A spark. A pulse. A quiet rebellion. On the 3rd night, unable to breathe under the weight of what I knew, I drove to the company's old warehouse, the place my father used to bring me when I was a kid. He'd been a line worker before rising to manager. No privilege. No shortcuts. He worked for everything he had, and he taught me to do the same. I could still hear his voice echoing through the dusty rafters. A real Hale isn't made by blood. He's made by backbone. Standing there among the machinery and oil-stained concrete, the grief in my chest cracked, and anger poured through clean and sharp. Evan had power, yes. Influence. Legacy. But he underestimated the one thing I had that he never learned. Grit. He'd been handed everything. I'd built myself from scratch. And I realized, with absolute clarity, that I wasn't afraid of fighting him. I was afraid of not fighting. Because if I let him erase me, he'd do it to the next person. And the next. And the next. Nepotism was his shield, but it was also his weakness, because he had never stood alone. Not once. He didn't know how to survive without the family name propping him up. I did. The decision hit me like cold air in my lungs. I wasn't going down. I was going to expose him. Not with rage. Not with scandal. With precision. I left the warehouse with a steady heartbeat for the first time in weeks. I went home, sat at my desk, and opened a blank document. Not for a proposal, but a plan. A strategy to gather evidence. To build allies. To make the board see the truth not through my words, but through undeniable proof. This wasn't just about defending my career anymore. This was about taking back what he tried to steal, and making sure that the Hale legacy belonged to the one who earned it. Me. The war had officially begun. Once the decision was made, something inside me aligned, sharp and deliberate like the click of a lock. I wasn't going to confront Evan with anger. That was what he expected. No, I would bury him with the truth. Methodically. Surgically. I began backing up files, quietly, obsessively, every proposal he stole, every draft with my metadata, every time-stamped email where I sent instructions he later presented as his own. Thursdays became my covert archaeology nights, digging through server logs, recovering deleted versions, saving them to a personal encrypted drive. Then I found the jackpot. A shared server folder Evan thought was hidden, full of preliminary presentations identical to mine, only retitled with his initials. Dated before his accusations of plagiarism. He'd stolen my work before he ever framed me for falsifying it. I didn't breathe for a full minute. I started reconnecting with people Evan treated like scenery, the junior analysts, the project coordinators, the tired engineers who stayed late correcting his mistakes. People he'd burned without even noticing. I listened. I collected stories. I asked for nothing. Trust is a currency you earn, not demand. And slowly, one by one, they began slipping me pieces. Screenshots. Forwarded emails. Slack messages where Evan mocked my pathetic work ethic. A recording from a call where he claimed he alone landed our biggest client, while I sat across the table doing the talking. My evidence folder grew heavy, too heavy to ignore. Evan was confident. Smug. That made him predictable. I pitched a new partnership idea at the staff level. Not officially, just loud enough to leak. A high-profile client with a reputation for ruthless standards. I knew Evan wouldn't resist poaching it. He would steal my notes, present them as his own, and bask in the spotlight. I just needed to make sure he took the bait, and choked on it. So I doctored the preliminary version deliberately, a small error buried deep in the financial forecast. Minor enough that only someone who hadn't done the original work would miss it. Sure enough, 2 days later, Evan announced his groundbreaking proposal to the board. He didn't credit me. He didn't ask questions. He walked into that meeting shining like the sun, while I waited outside, pulse steady, hands clasped behind my back. Because when the board discovered the flaw, when millions were misquoted in projected revenue, it wouldn't just be a mistake. It would be negligence. The room applauded as he entered, unaware that a fault line was already splitting beneath their feet. He thought he'd finally crushed me. He had no idea he was standing on a trap wired to his own downfall. And I was ready to pull the trigger. The day of the presentation felt unreal, like I was moving inside someone else's life. The boardroom was filled, media invited for a major announcement. Cameras flashed. Investors murmured with anticipation. And Evan. He stood at the front like a king about to be crowned. Flawless suit. Confident smile. My stolen work glowing on the projector behind him. Except this time, there was a crack beneath the paint, invisible to everyone but me. He clicked through the slides, voice smooth as silk. People ate from his hand, nodding, applauding. This was the moment he'd been pushing toward, the one where I disappeared and he soared. And then he reached the forecast slide, the one with the buried trap. Projected revenue, $82 million. Actual scalable value, $8.2 million. A decimal. One tiny decimal. The room went silent. Confused murmurs turned into alarm. A director leaned forward, squinting at the figures. Evan, are you saying the market increase justifies an $80 million projection? His confidence flickered. Sweat gathered at his collar. He clicked. Back. Forward. Back again. The numbers hadn't magically corrected themselves. Then came the killing blow. I stood up. Actually, I said, voice calm, steady, slicing through the room. That projection wasn't Evan's work. All eyes snapped to me. Evan went pale. His jaw tightened. Mason. This entire proposal is my research, I continued, placing a thick folder on the table. Documents, timestamps, screenshots, the truths he thought he buried. Every version of this file traces back to my drive. Evan copied my work, removed my name, and pressured staff to support his claim. And to top it off, I flipped a page, revealing the email logs. He drafted a recommendation for my termination based on falsified evidence. Gasps. Chairs shifted. Cameras turned to him like spotlights in an interrogation room. The board president picked up the memo, Evan's memo, holding it like contamination. Evan, he said slowly, did you fabricate these documents? The entire room watched him crumble. His mouth opened, closed, gears failing, lies choking in his throat. It's not, his twisting. But I wasn't done. I connected my laptop to the display, cued a final recording, Evan's voice from the hallway weeks ago. He has no idea. Trust me, he'll fold soon. The audio hit like a detonator. Executives recoiled. Investors whispered viciously. The president removed his glasses like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. And Evan, the golden heir, the untouchable, stood frozen, spotlight burning holes through him, nepotism dissolving like sugar in acid. They escorted him out of the room minutes later, not as a rising CEO, but as a liability. Security at his elbow. Cameras catching every step. His father's face was grey. His mother looked like something inside her had shattered. Nepotism tried to crush me. But now everyone saw the truth. It crushed him instead. And I wasn't done rebuilding. Not even close. The days after the boardroom showdown were surreal. Evan was gone, escorted not just from the meeting, but from the very company he thought he could inherit by name alone. His office remained untouched for weeks, a ghostly monument to entitlement gone wrong. Employees whispered in hallways, but this time their words weren't fear, they were relief, admiration, even respect. Me. I walked in each morning without a mask. Without pretending. My proposals were mine. My ideas credited. My office no longer felt like a cage of doubt and hidden sabotage, but a launchpad for the work I'd earned. I saw colleagues smile with genuine trust instead of guarded suspicion. But the most satisfying part, the poetic justice, came quietly. Evan's father, who had once smirked at my ambition, now had to explain to the board why his golden heir had been publicly dismantled. Every lie he'd believed in, every shortcut he'd trusted, crumbled. Nepotism had promised him success. Instead, it delivered humiliation. And he couldn't hide it. Not behind family, not behind charm, not behind the legacy he'd been taught to manipulate. I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't gloat. I just felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The years of stress, of unfair treatment, of stolen credit, finally light. And I realized something essential. Power doesn't belong to the entitled. It belongs to the prepared, the resilient, and the relentless. I leaned back in my chair one evening, watching the sunset filter through the office windows. The city below buzzed with life, oblivious, like nothing had happened. But inside, everything had changed. I had survived betrayal, exposed it, and reclaimed my rightful place. Evan's name still echoed sometimes in meetings, a cautionary tale whispered under breath. And every time it did, I smiled, remembering the exact moment nepotism tried to crush me, and how beautifully, spectacularly, it backfired. To anyone watching this story unfold, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Did it feel like the world was against you? Share your experiences in the comments below, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that betrayal can ignite the fire you didn't know was inside you. And if you've enjoyed following this journey from sabotage to revenge, make sure to hit subscribe. There's more truth, more lessons, and more stories where the underdog comes out on top. Remember this, the people who think they can erase you often forget. It's the ones they underestimate who leave the deepest scars.